Richard Dawkins is one of the most recognizable names in the world today. Until recently, he was a biologist at Oxford University. Now, most people don't know him because of his academic achievements. They know him primarily because of his attacks on the Christian faith. Now, his latest book is the next installment in his campaign to rid the world of religion. Dawkins' book, Outgrowing God, is aimed at a younger audience than his previous books. His goal is to convince young people that the Christian conception of God is just as bizarre, outrageous, and fanciful as anything you'd find in world mythology. Actually, Dawkins spends several pages in his book on the various mythologies around the world, and he clearly does this to try to establish that even though he's a scientist, he still knows a lot about ancient myth. It's difficult to be both elementary and pedantic at the same time, but Dawkins manages to do this with panache, and he still gets his facts wrong. Well, his book would have benefited immeasurably if he had just had a subscription to the online version of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Well, to be perfectly honest, Outgrowing God is an academic dumpster fire, filled with logical fallacies and factual errors, like everything else he writes. It has all the academic sophistication and literary excellence you would come to expect from Wikipedia, if Wikipedia articles were written by children. You wouldn't quite get that if you read what his friends are saying about the book. He's getting the kinds of responses that you would normally expect from someone who writes his own reviews. Well, Dawkins is his own worst enemy. He's cultivated a reputation for refusing to debate qualified apologists. He's declined one opportunity after another to debate William Lane Craig, who is one of the foremost Christian apologists of our day. He claims it's because he doesn't want to make Craig famous. What Dawkins doesn't know is that Craig is already famous, and even Little Richard's supporters have told him that it looks like cowardice on his part. The big kid in school keeps inviting him to meet behind the science portable after the 3 o'clock bell, and Dawkins keeps refusing to show up. Of course, anyone attempting to criticize the great Richard Dawkins can expect to be met with the frenzied shrieks of his followers, who defend him with all the zeal and fervor of an atheist jihadist. In fact, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to say that Dawkins and his supporters are like the atheist version of the Westboro Baptist Church. Both of them like to get together and protest and call their opponents names. Because, there's nothing that screams adult like using profanity to ridicule the opposition. Now, I say this because Dawkins and others, like him, have given very little indication that they're really interested in the truth. In the first Reason rally held in Washington, D.C. in 2012, Dawkins gave a totally cringeworthy speech. If you're unfamiliar with this event, it's where militant atheists go to complain about a God they don't believe in and celebrate their freedom from a religion they talk about constantly. At this rally, Dawkins told the audience when dealing with believers that they should mock them, ridicule them in public with contempt. It was so bad that the only thing that could have made it worse was if at the end of his speech they played that noise that Pac-Man makes when he dies. That's because what Dawkins was advocating there was not a genuine attempt to understand the fundamental nature of reality, what is really real and how do we know it, basic epistemology. Rather, he just advocated simple name-calling and shaming, and he isn't alone. Anytime someone rightly criticizes Dawkins for his legions of factual errors and fallacious arguments, you can expect any one of his loyal devotees to squeal like a stuck pig. We can see an example of this in an article from the font of all wisdom that is Salon.com. A few years ago, journalist Jeffrey Taylor wrote an article lionizing Dawkins and attacking his detractors. Like many of Dawkins' followers, Taylor breathlessly gushes on and on about how great Dawkins is. When I got to the end of the article, I half expected to see a marriage proposition. But Taylor also blasts the religious at every opportunity, calling them all kinds of names, insulting them and their beliefs, and casually dismissing legitimate concerns about Dawkins and his work. To be honest, I haven't seen this much squalling since my youngest daughter was in diapers and she lost her binky. Well, Dawkins clearly prides himself on being called Darwin's Rottweiler. This reference is a nod to the 19th century biologist Thomas Huxley, who was famously known as Darwin's Bulldog because of his tenacious defense of Darwinian evolution. This spirit can be seen in Dawkins' followers, who not only oppose the religious, but also their atheist peers who are not anti-religious enough. They are fully willing to cannibalize anyone from their own camp not deemed strident enough. Now, anyone trying to be the voice of moderation or reason in forums on the Dawkins website can be expected to be called a religious sympathizer, a troll, or Neville Chamberlain, because, Nazis and stuff. I will reserve a couple of points of praise for Dawkins. He is a brilliant man, and I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that he is an incredibly intelligent person and a very, very capable scientist. He's also very controlled. Even when he gets upset, he's still pretty subdued. I very much admire his British reserve. If he were an American atheist like John Loftus or Richard Carrier, he'd be calling the local news to film him rolling around on the floor in a temper tantrum at the nearest Chick-fil-A. But getting back to the subject of his latest book, Outgrowing God, Dawkins has spectacularly failed to take his own medicine. He wants other people to learn from their mistakes, and he claims to be willing to do it himself. He even tells a story about this in The God Delusion. He includes an anecdote about a professor of his who admitted that he'd been proved wrong, and all of the students applauded him for it. They clapped their hands red, he says. Dawkins might be willing to concede he's wrong in certain circumstances when it concerns the field of science, but ironically, he can't quite manage to do it when it comes to the study of religion, which he knows almost nothing about. Christian apologists have been pointing out his mistakes for years, and those same mistakes reappear in his latest book for teens. It's ironic that for a book titled Outgrowing God, Dawkins has done virtually nothing to mature in his understanding of the Christian faith. Now, not only did Dawkins learn nothing from Christian apologists who have been pointing out his mistakes for over a decade, he's now targeting teenagers who don't know the difference between a real religious scholar and a biologist who slept at a Holiday Inn the night before. Tricky Rick simply wants to demonize religion to teenagers. Of course, you can believe Richard, even though he hasn't studied religion, because he's a smart person. Well, speaking from the standpoint of a Christian apologist, I almost feel like I should thank him for making my job easier. Dawkins has shown for years now that he isn't interested in the truth, he just wants to score points. And he usually does it by mischaracterizing the Bible and the Christians who follow it. Of course, deliberately misrepresenting an opponent's views is not only childish, but it reveals your insecurities with your own beliefs. Well, adults want to know about the true nature of reality. It's one of the things that we develop as we mature. We have the ability to view the wider world and understand that it doesn't revolve around us. So all apologies to Professor Dawkins, while he's busy peddling half-truths and bad information to teenagers who don't know any better, the adults are going to be over here talking about things that really matter.